So good morning, everyone. Welcome. I am Jessie Whittish with Kentucky Youth Advocates. Thank you to all of you for joining us today, whether you're here for the first time or the 17th time. It's really good to see you. This is going to be a really unique and special forum. We're very excited to be joined by Kentucky's Agricultural Commissioner, Dr. Ryan Quarles. And we're going to start with a conversation with Commissioner Quarles. And then following that, we're going to have a panel discussion with Commissioner Quarles, Kate McDonald of Feeding Kentucky, and Leah Feagin with the Kentucky School Nutrition Association and Maysville Independent School District. So just want to let you know, we're kind of doing this in two parts. We're going to be recording today's forum to share as both a video and as a podcast. So because of that, we ask that you stay muted, but we're taking questions and comments via the chat feature. And we may give those to panelists today, and if not, we're collecting them for later. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Terry Brooks, who is going to introduce Commissioner Quarles.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Jessie. And as Jessie said, we so appreciate all of you joining. I always say some of you are competing for perfect attendance pins, and others, this is the first time you've been with us. We're here every Wednesday, and you know, one week you may hear folks from Leader McConnell's office, and the next week it may be from the governor's office, and it may be constitutional officers, legislators, or on-the-ground leaders. So our focus on these Wednesdays is COVID and Kentucky's kids, and we know that that's so many different sectors that that we have a lot to cover. Perhaps unfortunately every week. Today, we certainly want not to lose the policy theme around food insecurity in children, but some of you who have been on these before know that I at least operate on the hypothesis that for us to begin to understand policy, we have to understand policy makers. And when we have a great leader like Commissioner Quarles on, I want to spend a little bit of time just talking to him about his biography and his thought process and influences, because I think it's so important that we as citizens get a sense of who a commissioner is, or who a secretary is, or who a legislator is. And so we're going to spend a little bit of that kind of time, and then I'm going to pivot to my colleague, Mahek Kalra, who is going to facilitate the policy discussion. We have posted Commissioner Quarles' bio. I will tell you that from my perspective, when I first began working with Ryan, he was a legislator and always gave us great access, great counsel, and straight answers, which I really appreciated. As commissioner, it should not be lost on anybody that I believe he was flirting with maybe not 100% popular margin, but darn close to it a couple years ago. And the reason for that acceptance is best exemplified before everybody joined. We were commenting on his backdrop, and he's like, hey, A, I built it as an undergrad, and B, it's repurposed barnwood. So I had told him at the end of this, I'm going to give you his personal cell, and if you want a background built, just text it, and he'll take care of it within the week. So we appreciate that, Commissioner. Commissioner, I always am fascinated by folks who have a lot going for them, and probably have had a lot going for them for a long time, and yet they decided to pursue public service. So can you take us back to those decision days when you decided to run for office, to go after that legislative seat? What were the motivations? What were the influences? Why the heck are you doing what you're doing?
Well, thank you and good morning. And I first off want to say thank you for what you all do. As a legislator, Kentucky Youth Advocates have a lot of influence in Frankfort, and you have a purpose that unfortunately there is still a tremendous amount of need for advocacy for. So I just want to say thank you for what you all do, and for the other partners that and familiar faces I see on the Zoom call. I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a family setting where we all had to chip in if we wanted to put food on the table, and we had to pray if we wanted to have Christmas, if we had good weather or not. I was really fortunate to have a father that was involved in farm organizations. So I grew up with a parental influence in my dad as someone that was going to Farm Bureau meetings, going to different crop committee meetings, going to Washington to talk about legislation. So I had a public service influence with my dad, but perhaps more so my mom. My mom was a public school teacher, and she taught at a HBCU at Kentucky State University. And so she was a very caring person, and she went on to get her PhD later in life as an adult learner. And so I always had a mother that was educating not only the youth, but also educating herself and farming on the side. And so when I graduated undergrad and went to law school, I really got involved in not only policy making, but politics. And one of the gems I like to tell people is that we can disagree on the politics. That's normal. That's the American way of life. But if you want to get policy changed, you have to understand the politics. And I think that we live in a very divisive time where a tweet or something, the flavor of the day, whatever's on the news, can really make people upset and mad. But don't get upset and mad about the process. That it's designed to be messy. It's designed so that people can be part of the conversation. And so for me, please take time to understand the politics if you want to change the policy. And I always tell youth and college age kids, go work on a campaign. I don't care what party you're with. I don't care what candidate. Just go walk a mile in their shoes. Maybe you win, maybe you come up short, but you have a greater appreciation for policymakers, not just at the local level and state level, but also Washington, D.C. So I decided to run for office because I was really stupid, and I was still in law school, and I ran against a 14-year incumbent. And for me, it was an opportunity that, hey, if I won, tremendous opportunity to walk right in and work on agriculture issues in the legislature. But if I lost, I was 25 years old. If I lost, I was like, well, no big deal. Maybe I'll come back another time. And I was just very fortunate to have started a career in public service. And one last thought here. Public service is a tough occupation sometimes, and it's often misunderstood. But I like to remind people that you don't have to run for office to be influential. That sometimes there's this misperception that, oh, well, only an elected official can change this, and that is not the case at all. Some of the most powerful and influential people I've met in my life were political appointees, or they were civil servants that are immune from the political process, and for good reason. And that those are the ones that I go to if I really need advice or mentorship. And so, and plus, some people who did not run for office could never win a political office to begin with because they're so focused on a particular issue. And so, I think it's important to realize that there's many pieces to the puzzle when it comes to changing public policy.
Thank you so much. It's interesting because every time we ask that question, whether it's to a member of our congressional delegation, whether it was frankly the candidates for governor last time around, whether it was President Stivers or a local official, everybody always talks about that personal and public influence, and just what you did with parents and also public officials. I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but part of what fascinates me, Ryan, about your own trajectory is I would assume being a legislator and being in the executive side of things as a constitutional officer, they're both really important leadership roles, but their functions are so different. I think nationally, we talk a lot about sometime an executive branch person, a governor who becomes a congressman, or a congressman who, becomes president. There's lots of different theories as to what works, what doesn't work, how similar, how different they are. So you're one of the few cats that have made that transition with most folks would agree successfully. What are you learning? What would you say to folks about leadership lessons that are similar and different in those roles?
You know, I was blessed to serve in the legislature for 5 years, and that was really somewhat of a building grounds for me. I didn't serve a single day in the majority party when I was a legislator. I was in the minority. And so for me, I had no choice but to learn the process, learn my fellow, who my fellow legislators were, get to know who their spouses were, the name of their pets. And so I was able to get legislation passed while serving in the minority. And one of the lessons I learned in a legislative body, especially a large one with 100 members, is that everyone has an equal vote, but they don't have equal influence. And that it's so important to build a relationship with key members of the legislative body. And for me, especially serving minority, you know, if you want to Frankfurt and through bombs and through grenades and just insult people, you're not going to accomplish anything. And for me, it was more important about, let's discuss the issue at hand today. There may be 20 votes we take, and you know what? We might agree on 18 of them. I don't know. But it's important to make that you keep your powder dry so that when the next vote comes up, the next piece of legislation, that even if you had a disagreement in the past, you're still able to work with somebody else. And then making the transition to the executive branch, I get to set my own schedule. Unlike a legislator, I was at the leadership decides what's going to happen that day. For me, I have a greater appreciation about the construct of laws, regulations as well, because we have to implement what the legislature passes. And a lot of times there's conflicts in that. And so for me, in the executive branch, I think that I would not have had perhaps some of the success if I had not had the legislative background, because for me, I have a tremendous respect for the law. Even when the law is unfair, we try to fix things. And so now when I go to Frankfurt with a legislative package, we usually have a pretty high success rate. I think this past session, even with the coronavirus shutting down the session, we passed, I think, 7 or 8 bills in a nonpartisan, sometimes 98-0 votes. And so we were very, very fortunate for that sort of relationship. And then the third, co-equal branch of government, as an attorney, you're actually an officer of the court. And I think that you're going to see a greater appreciation for the judicial branch as well.
Okay, great. And you led into my third and final just you and me discussion, because you mentioned that in your current role, you set your own schedule. You also set your own agenda. And I think folks on both sides of the aisle would say that you have successfully redefined what being agricultural commissioner is about. I'm curious, at the end of the day, as you walk out of that office on your last day as ag commissioner, what do you hope is the 2 or 3 or 4 elements of the Ryan Quarles legacy as ag commissioner?
That's a tough question. There's only 12 of us that are elected in the entire country. The rest, the other 38 plus the territories, are appointed positions. They're part of the governor's cabinet. And so for the 12 that are elected, which are primarily in the South, it's a bit more powerful office. And for me, I think the 2 real big legacy items, or 3 big legacy items I'd like to accomplish, is number 1 is serving the youth. I love the state fair. I love helping 4-H and FFA kids out. I love exposing kids who did not have an agriculture background to the science, technology, engineering, and math in our urban areas, or sometimes in rural communities where kids simply don't know where their food comes from. I love our youth programs and getting agriculture into the classroom. Secondly, I want to be an advocate for modernizing Kentucky. That I think that in 2020, and with the pandemic, one of the silver linings is that we have to have high-speed internet across Kentucky. And we're going to be spending a lot of time in the second term making sure that it doesn't matter if you're on Main Street, Kentucky, or out on a rural route. Families not only deserve it, but we need it. Our great-grandparents electrified Kentucky in the 30s and 40s. We have to do the same thing, because if we're going to have distance learning, if we're going to have kids learning from home, we have to have affordable high-speed internet. And the third and final thing, there's no law in Kentucky, there's no regulation on the books that says the Department of Agriculture has to address food insecurity. this has been a pillar of my first term, and it's going to be a pillar of my second term, is that I think it's despite no law or legal obligation, it is the responsibility of the Department of Agriculture to not only promote the production of food on the farmer side, but the consumers of food as well. And as we know in Kentucky, there are some major disparages. We have food insecurity rates that are much higher than the national average. And with a 30% increase of Kentucky in food banks during COVID, I want to be able to walk out on my last day in office to say that we did something to reduce hunger in Kentucky. And I think that we're on a trajectory to do that. And the pandemic has only amplified the need for it.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to share that personal story. I, for one, very publicly would say I appreciate that you're a leader with a big brain and a bigger heart. I love that combination. So we'd like to pivot from the Ryan Quarles show to making him now a co-star along with some other folks. And to do that, I'm going to turn the rest of the forum over to Mehek Kalra. Mehek has a limited role at KYA. She's just in charge of our policy agenda. So Mehek, why don't you take it from here? And again, thanks for joining. Mr. Commissioner, thank you so much for making time in your schedule. Mehek, they're all yours.
Thank you, Terry. And of course, the commissioner is joining us for the rest of this conversation as well. So we're excited about that. But we also have two other panelists, Leah Feagin, the Vice President of Kentucky School Nutrition Association, and Kate McDonald, who is Kentucky Kids Eat Coordinator with Feeding Kentucky. So I'm going to start off with Kate and ask, can you tell us more about Feeding Kentucky?
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Kate McDonald, and I work at Feeding Kentucky, the statewide anti-hunger network. We represent the 7 food banks that serve every county in Kentucky, and these food banks, on average, feed 1 in 7 Kentuckians every year. I came into this work because I think everyone has the right to healthy food. Specifically, my work focuses on child hunger, and I manage the Kentucky Kids Eat Program and Coalition, as well as the No Kid Hungry Kentucky campaign. And what that is we provide funding, training, and a voice for those that feed kids. And we're currently just working to amplify federal child nutrition programs. So that's school breakfast and lunch, after school meals, summer meals. And I just want to say too, we're really grateful to partners like KDA and Commissioner Quarles. Those collaborations like our KVIP program and the mobile meals grants are critical to our work. So thank you, Commissioner Quarles.
Thanks, Kate. So definitely more than just food banks when we're talking about Feeding Kentucky. And so that's just something that is important for all of our advocates across the state to hear, as well as families. So thank you for that, Kate. Leah, you're wearing a couple different hats today. So can you talk to us about the Kentucky School Nutrition Association and also your role as Maysville's independent school district?
Yes, and I'm at Mayfield Independent, and people very frequently get that confused. We've actually had delivery drivers at times that are headed to Maysville, which is the very far end of the state from us. So yeah, you always want to make sure if you're driving here, you know where you're going. But thank you for having me, and thank you, Commissioner Quarles. You know, I am a huge supporter of the Department of Ag, and I have been since I joined school nutrition, especially when I became more familiar with the programs. And I don't know if you can see on the shelf behind me back there is our junior chef champion medallion back there. So I'm very proud of that. We had a winning junior chef team. It was actually the very first. And that is, again, one of the many things that the Department of Ag does for school programs. It's just amazing how far that program, or how the programs in general, have grown in the time that I've been affiliated with it. And Commissioner Quarles is another leader in that growth. And so we are very grateful for his work. And then also Kate and I have partnered together for the last few years. And it's interesting because you said not just feeding banks, and Feeding Kentucky, like, I had no idea all the programs they were involved in, and I was glad that we were able to make that connection. And I might not have necessarily made the connection as soon if I hadn't been involved in Kentucky School Nutrition Association. So our association is very willing to partner and willing to reach out and to do whatever we can for nutrition of the children. And you know, we even take it nationally. When we go to DC to legislate for school nutrition, we realize we're benefiting the kids of Kentucky, but we also realize that any of that legislation that is passed benefits children all over the United States. So it's not just about the kids in Mayfield or the kids in Kentucky. It's a national program. So we very much work hard to try to do whatever we can, and things like today's forum. I'm always looking for more information and how I can help and how we can continue to grow in our programs. So you know, there's a lot I could talk about, so I don't want to, you just kind of guide me.
That sounds good, and we definitely will. And sorry about that, Mayfield Independent. I have that in my notes. I've corrected that.
Okay, that happens a lot.
Well, Commissioner, do you mind sharing why food access is important to you and your office, especially as it relates to kids?
Absolutely. No, we're blessed to come from a strong agricultural state. Our farmers punch above their weight class, and we're not just good, we are great at producing food, whether it be livestock, protein, grains, vegetables, etc. And so it's really discomforting for me to know that despite being a strong agriculture state, 1 in 7 Kentuckians and as many as 1 in 5 Kentucky school children in K through 12 suffer from food insecurity. And for me, knowing that there are countless families whose children's last nutritious meal is sometimes at Friday at lunch, and it might be Monday morning or Monday at lunch during a normal school year, that might be a weekend they have poor nutrition or lack of access, or during the evenings. And so, as we all know, if the kids come into school hungry or doesn't get proper nutrition, and learning is the last thing on their mind. And there's study after study after study that can show you that the trajectory of kids who suffer from food insecurity is simply not the same. And we need to make sure everyone has equal opportunity. And for us, that means making sure there's access to nutrition. And there's a difference in America. Calories are cheap, but nutrition comes at a premium. And that's tough, especially when you're putting budgets together, especially during the new normal with COVID. It's very hard. And so for me, the passion is not just about making sure that kids, whether they're in rural Kentucky or urban Kentucky, get access to nutrition. It's about giving them an equal chance with the trajectory of their life. That we know that if they're not making it out of middle school or high school in the same rates as their peers, we know that there could be some very long-term adverse effects. And so that's the main motivation. Plus, as a farm kid, we want to introduce Kentucky Proud to a new set of consumers that hopefully choose healthy diets for the rest of their life and support local agriculture.
Well, I appreciate that. And I could definitely sense the passion for this topic. So thank you. You kind of touched on it, Commissioner Quarles. And so I'm going to turn it over to Kate and ask her, what does the data show? Can you share more of the food access landscape, especially as it relates to race, place, and income?
Absolutely. So basics first. Food insecurity, when we talk about it, what it means is it describes a household's inability to provide enough food for every person to live an active, healthy lifestyle. And food insecurity is just one of the ways we can measure and assess the risk of hunger. So in Kentucky, our latest Map the Meal Gap data from Feeding America shows that overall food insecurity is 14.8%, and specifically child food insecurity is 18.9%. And just to note, that data was collected pre-coronavirus. So significant unemployment nationwide and in Kentucky has undoubtedly had an impact on those numbers, and projections suggest that child food insecurity in Kentucky could reach 28.1% in 2020. So that's close to 1 in 3 kids in Kentucky experiencing food insecurity. And I'm sure you're probably wondering why child food insecurity is much higher than the overall food insecurity. And there are a lot of factors in play there, but some families in need of public support face challenges maintaining consistent enrollment in federal child nutrition programs and nutrition programs, and others may not even qualify. In fact, 1 in 4 food insecure children live in a home that's likely ineligible for programs like SNAP or WIC. So that's one of the barriers that these kids are facing. And speaking about place, we get a lot of questions. I get a lot of questions in my work about food deserts. It's probably something most of you have heard about. Food deserts are areas, whether that's a neighborhood or community, a county, where there's no place to reach or to buy groceries. But I want to talk about something else that I think is really interesting. So something I learned and talked a lot about when I did food access work in New Orleans is what we called there food swamps. And I think there are a lot of food swamps in Kentucky. These are neighborhoods or communities where there may be somewhere to access groceries, but these places have really limited food access that's high nutritional value. So this may be a gas station, a dollar store, a corner store. For example, I spoke to someone from Trimble County right after school was let out because of coronavirus. And she told me the only place to buy groceries within the county was the Dollar General. So many counties in Kentucky have similar place-based access issues, whether that's a full-service grocery store is 30 minutes away or across town. And obviously, I could talk this whole time about issues in transportation, but transportation is one of the significant barriers to place-based food insecurity. And then obviously, speaking about race, the relationship between race and ethnicity to food insecurity is intertwined with other kind of established determinants of food insecurity, like poverty, unemployment, incarceration, disability, and concentration of social and economic disadvantages for Black and Hispanic people over their life course is a significant driver in high rates of food insecurity. So things like racial discrimination through reinforcing these inequitable systems like housing, employment, I mentioned incarceration, healthcare, criminal justice. So all of those things are kind of part of this. They're all connected. You can't really separate all of those issues because they're all intertwined. So that's very top level what's happening in terms of race, place, food insecurity. But in Kentucky, there are some significant barriers. And a lot of it has to do with where you live and what programs and what things are available to you and who you are.
That's a nice segue to my next question for panelists. So just thinking about COVID, we know access to food assistance during this critical time is huge, a huge issue that kids and families are facing. So what supports, programs, organizations are responding to the needs for kids and families? And how has that response changed to COVID? So I'm just this is an open question for all panelists.
Well, if you don't mind, one thing we started a few years ago is called the Kentucky Hunger Initiative. I know many of you are familiar with that. So in 2016, we kind of laid the groundwork of connecting agriculture with our anti-hunger affiliates, primarily through our food banks, which is now obviously Feeding Kentucky as our main primary partner. And this affects not only church-based, volunteer-based, school-based pantries or food distribution sources, but what we saw over the last couple of years is that the agriculture community is starting to get more involved. They're making financial donations. They're trying to upgrade refrigeration capacity at our not only the pantries but also at the food banks. And so, without getting too long-winded here, the work that we accomplished back in 2016 through 2020 really set us up for a greater capacity in February, March of 2020, when people, 40% unemployment in Kentucky, a 30% increase in the number of Kentuckians utilizing food banks. Despite farmers having a tough time on the farm right now and losing money, we have had over $500,000 donated by Farm Bureau to our food banks. That money was then turned around and used to buy up Kentucky Proud Goods, 10,000 pounds of sausage, 5,000 pounds of cheese, 48,000 hamburgers, milk products, and over 500,000 eggs donated. And so I think a lot of these donations were facilitated from an office because they were comfortable working with Feeding Kentucky due to the groundwork that we did. And so it's not just about donating food when we know that more Kentuckians need it, but it's also about donating the resources so that we can have transportation, so that summer feeding, which I think is more important now than ever before, has access, and we have more mobile school buses and go out and deliver meals. And so for us on the ag side, the generosity of our farmers really was a source of pride for me these last few months, and we're going to continue to sustain that.
I don't know, Leah, I'll kind of maybe set the stage for you, but Leah's definitely been on the front lines in terms of coronavirus response to feeding kids. But essentially what happened in March, when school was let out because of coronavirus, one won't get too in the weeds, but essentially the summer food service program, which obviously by name, summer happens in the summertime, is actually an emergency response program as well. And so a lot of that kicked in when schools were looking to feed kids when they were at home. And Leah, I don't know if you want to speak more at how that functioned this spring, particularly in Mayfield.
Yes, it was very interesting because I was actually in DC when travel started being shut down for different companies, and we were at our national legislative conference. And so everyone is starting to collaborate on their plan when we return to our districts. And I believe I returned on Thursday, and on Friday they said we're shutting school down. We got to start feeding kids Monday. So you can imagine, of course, every district was in the same situation I was in, and you had to come up with a plan pretty quickly, which is interesting because we have disaster feeding plans, but this wasn't a national disaster. There wasn't a tornado. Everybody's sheltering in place, I guess, technically. So we came up with a system because of our summer meal program already being very successful in past summers, that helped us in this situation. So the system was, we set up the sites that we kind of typically had. We worked with our transportation department on kind of key areas that children would need to be able to walk to safely and things of that nature. And so that was also vital. In the summer, typically, we don't have the funding for necessarily, and not even necessarily the funding, but the availability of school bus drivers to do a lot of mobile routes. So when we had looked at a mobile route in the past, it was going to be one of our food service staff, driving maybe a van type, because then you have to have a CDL and all the things that go into that. So with this, when all this happened, our bus drivers were available. They were already working. They were going to continue working. So we had buses going out to all the different points in the city. So then what happened the first week of May, a lot of the school personnel fulfilled their contract. So that took away 2/3 of our staff. So then we continued operating with about 1/3 of the staff that we had been operating with to continue into it's still emergency meals, but it's still the summer meal program. And, one of the things that Kate mentioned about the food swamps or the food deserts, I see a lot of that in Western Kentucky also. There's a couple counties that border us. We have a large county. We have a Walmart. We have a couple little local grocers. But there's counties that border us that do not have a single grocery store. And they're very remote. And they're, if there's certain housing areas there, those people sometimes don't have cars. So again, it's the Dollar General. So it's very much a critical need for the schools to be able to play into that. And one of the things that we have found so vital is the fact that there was a way in the past summers where congregate feeding versus non-congregate feeding was always up for debate. So, for example, you have kids that maybe come to the library for a summer reading program and they can get a meal there, but those kids pretty much had to be driven there. Well, what about all those kids that couldn't have someone drive them to a location? Because in that area, we had set up one of the mobile sites with the school buses. That was very much a high need that we never knew about before, and a lot of them were walking to that school bus. So had it not been for the fact that we could now allow the kids to not have to eat their meals on site, because again, we've just got a bus sitting there. We don't have a table, we don't have an awning, you know, rain. Of course, at that time we were still having some cold. Like, it wasn't realistic for kids to sit there on the site like it would be at the library. So that helped tremendously that we were able to get past that restriction, and then start not only with the sites where they could just walk up and grab the bags, but also for the buses to be able to go door to door, which is what they've done all summer. And so moving forward, it's going to be very crucial to continue that trend, because we've had situation after situation where kids couldn't walk to a site, and they would call, or maybe they'd reach out to the teacher. And that was going to be my two biggest barriers that I had for my thoughts today were the transportation, and then also there was the language. So if they didn't speak English, they would reach out to a teacher that they could communicate with, and they would say, hey, this house needs food. Mom's home, she just had a baby. She can't, you know, get out and walk with multiple children to a site. And then there was another situation, well, there was multiple situations where in their neighborhood, maybe their families living next door to each other, or just friends. And so one mom is babysitting while all the other parents are going to work. So that mom may have 10 kids in her house. She can't take 10 kids to the nearest stop. Sometimes there's not sidewalks the whole way, and all these other. So, I mean, we had and we just never knew, because one, we didn't have that chain of communication going. You know, summer would start, we'd say, here's our sites, and, you know, hope you can make it, please join us. And we knew to some extent that kids couldn't get there. There was a lot of kids who couldn't get there, but we just didn't realize that volume. And it was interesting when we first started our school, our district office personnel. So like myself and the person in my office, and then our superintendent and our DPP, we were all going out delivering meals and just getting in like Suburbans and whatever, because we had the buses set up at the sites. And so we didn't have enough buses to do that and have them at those sites. You know, you would walk up to a door and a child would meet you at the door, just like you were, you know, bringing Christmas gifts, like just so excited to have food. And it was very humbling. It was very heartbreaking. There was a couple situations where I admit I went back on my own and took bags of food later, just because you just knew the need in that home. And so I'm very passionate about this, and it's very much, you know, what I've found through this, from my own perspective, it's very much a ministry for me. It's not just a job. So, you know, we really have to keep working, and we have to keep collaborating to try to move forward with these same food insecurities that aren't going to be gone next summer, even if the virus has a cure.
Well, first, I just want to say thank you for the work that you do. It's a critical role that schools play in providing access to food, but I could tell your heart and passion are in it. So I appreciate what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So it kind of, we know that schools play such a critical role, but what other supports are out there for kids during this critical time?
We started a really fun, interactive program through our cooperative extension office. Kentucky is very unique. We're one of only 4 or 5 states in the entire country that has an extension office in every single county. And in many respects, they already have a nutrition-based programs. Some of them are based towards senior citizens. There's cooking contests, obviously the fairs. But what we did, particularly for young children who are looking for something to do this summer instead of playing video games, is to get outside, get their hands dirty, and start their own garden. We started what's called the Kentucky Victory Garden program with our nutritionist, with UK and KSU Cooperative Extension in my office. And I've always collected these World War II Victory Garden posters. And just to give you a little context, in World War II, half of all the food consumed in America came from gardens. It did not come from farms, half of it. Just imagine how different life was then back then, that you actually, if you wanted to eat, you had to go pick it from your backyard. And so we started a program where even now in July, it's not too late to start a garden. whether you have a quarter acre or a windowsill to put a couple potted plants on, go to your local extension office and you can download a poster. It's a retro poster. We redid it. It kind of looks like it has this World War II theme to it. It's going to give you some advice about getting your gardening started. It's also going to give you some recipes, some Kentucky Proud recipes to say, how do you prepare a butternut squash? And that's something that Kate and I work on a lot, is a lot of times food that goes through our food banks, some folks may not know how to properly prepare it. And so it's kind of neat. It's fun, but it also serves an educational purpose that our young people hopefully are learning that food just doesn't magically show up at a grocery store, that it starts on a family farm. So that's a program that's up and running throughout the rest of the year.
That's a great call to action to partners. And I think I could even learn a thing or two on that website.
I think I want to mention too, SNAP plays a really important role in food access, and pandemic EBT is something that's kind of based off of something that other states have implemented in the summer with summer EBT. The thought process is when school is out of session, parents, their food budgets are suddenly much tighter with kids at home. And obviously we saw that during the pandemic. So pandemic EBT application, it's essentially SNAP benefits for those, for kids that are, that receive free or reduced price lunch at school. And it kind of is meant to help add to the budget, the food budget of families that have kids. So those applications are going to be open until the end of August to receive those benefits. And that's something I would really, I know participation has been actually pretty high in Kentucky, but I would encourage your networks to, if families are eligible and haven't applied, to apply, because that funding is available to them. So.
Thanks, Kate, for that. I know that's something that we at KYA have been advocating for strongly, and we know that potentially more than 75% of Kentucky kids are eligible and qualify for the pandemic EBT benefit. So we know it's definitely a critical benefit for all families, especially right now. So thank you for bringing that up. That kind of shifts us to thinking through what state and federal policies and also budget investments are needed. Again, this is open to anyone.
Well, I'll start and say that what Leah was discussing about congregate feeding, that is something that I know Commissioner Quarles and I have spoken a lot about, and Leah and I have spoken a lot about. So that's part of the regulations of the summer food service program, that meals have to be eaten on site. That has been waived because of the pandemic. It's not a great idea to have a bunch of kids all sitting and eating on a bus together, or sitting somewhere and eating together. But that's something that we would like for it to be a permanent change in the regulations, that congregate feeding is optional. It makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about this fantastic program at the library where you're doing art projects and science projects and your kids also happen to get a free meal. That makes sense. But what doesn't make sense are those families that don't have transportation, don't have access. Kids may be at home alone, or it may be unsafe for them to travel to a meal site. And a lot of summer sponsors have been seeing significant increase in participation, and in part due to the waiving of this congregate feeding rule. So that's something that we at Feeding Kentucky I feel very passionate about. So that's one call to action from me that I feel very strongly about, changing that rule permanently.
I would echo that. That's probably the single biggest issue that I think that has proven itself to be okay. There's always concern about people picking up food that don't qualify for that program. And that's always going to be the case, whether we're dealing with COVID or not. But I think the waivers, not only for congregate feeding, but also to allow our school systems to overnight, as Leah talked about, overnight change the way they produce food and get it out. And about once a week, I go out and help promote summer feeding, passing out meals, and just letting people know that those programs exist is still somewhat of a challenge sometimes. But I think another call to action is that the United States Department of Agriculture has a unique opportunity right now through what's called CFAP. And there's about $3 billion that is being spent right now over the course of this year on buying up agricultural commodities And this does two things, really. Number one, prices in agriculture have been up and down quite a bit this year. You probably read about the meat shortages and plants being shut down temporarily. Major disruptions in the system. Farmers are losing money right now. And so what happens is this $3 billion being used to buy up commodities. And here in Kentucky, I know that they've bought up milk, and that milk's being passed out or given out for free. We want to make sure that as many programs, commodities, vegetables, and other types of Kentucky Proud Foods are participating in this program. And so if there's yet another round of coronavirus aid, which it looks like there's talks about that currently in Washington, D.C., we need to make sure that we support our food banks, our pantries, the other programs that are already out there, our senior farmers market programs, to make sure that we continue, because we know that as the economy starts to slowly reopen, sadly, some of the jobs people have do not exist anymore. And the same is true with our restaurant industry. And so if there's a call of action, let's make sure that we give USDA the funding to continue to buy up American-grown, Kentucky-grown agriculture goods so we can get it out to those in need. Plus they taste great.
Leah, do you have anything to add on policies or budget investments that are needed?
Well, no, I think I said that previously about the congregate feeding waiver and the non-congregate. But, I think that honestly, when this happened and then it became necessary for kids to receive meals delivered and that it wasn't really an option. And then we saw how well it worked. To me, it just speaks volumes about how maybe we need to be more aware of piloting programs and things like that, on the federal side of things, because we've been asking for it for years. And then when we were kind of put in the situation where that was the only choice we had, and then I was like, oh wow, look at how great this is. And it's like, yeah, we felt like that was the case. So it's just one of those things that it's unfortunate that something like this has to happen, but then again, maybe that will be one of the positives that results from the situation we've all been in. I don't know about the other type of legislative efforts that will be in play once things are less geared toward pandemic response. But I know that, and I said this to Kate the other day, the people that, the school districts that I work with, and again, kind of like I said, when we legislate for everyone. It's not just what I need at Mayfield, it's what's going to benefit the whole, because sometimes what we're looking at or we're talking about from the legislative perspective doesn't necessarily apply to me and my district, but it might apply to a larger majority. So one of the things that we've seen is that certain districts, depending on their situations, they may really struggle with certain budgeting aspects. And for example, I can think of a couple of districts surrounding me where we typically in the past, their summer meal program was non-existent. And, there are districts, there are counties where there are no summer meal programs. So most summers, and I can't remember how many years this has been, several years, I'm operating our summer meal program out of 4 counties. So because those directors, that district, and it's not that the person just didn't want to do it, it was that you have to have the staffing. And honestly, we've had to go to 2 weeks on, 1 week off for the last few weeks because our staff had not had time off since Christmas. So everyone that got to go home and work from home, that didn't apply to our food service staff. So they were still out every day, right in the middle of it. You can't social distance when you're in a small kitchen. You got to just get in there and you're loading buses and all this together. You're face to face all day long, every day. And so we gave them a week off around the 4th, and then they're going to have another week off after this 2-week period. But it's not, there needs to be that collaboration with the other entities. So one director I was speaking to, and it's a Northern Kentucky county, she has food programs, food ministries in her county. So she stopped the summer meal program, and I can't name specifically what program it was that took over, but they stepped in, you know, whether it was maybe church-based or, you know, some type of food bank. They stepped in and started providing those summer meals. YMCAs, you know, in the past we've had YMCAs participate. So there needs to be more collaboration. School districts obviously step up and they do whatever they can whenever they can, but then sometimes it's not an option. So, you know, I keep trying to get buy-in. Like we had this summer, we had 3 churches that committed to a site location. So they were our summer staff at that location. And that was tremendous because there were days we barely had enough staff to get the food out, much less to go and then man all the sites. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I wonder if there's, is there a list of where the gaps are? Because I think that would be helpful to know where we could spark the conversation for unique partnerships.
So there is, USDA has a map that shows where all sites are in the country. So that would be, I think, your, and it's updated once a week through US data. So I think that would be a really great place to start. I would encourage people to, though, doing it as someone who does this on the state level, I will say it's pretty overwhelming to look at 120 counties and try to figure, as someone who I don't know of intimately every county, where the needs are and what makes the most sense. So I would encourage people within your own community to look at that map and see what neighborhoods are missing, what areas are missing. And I'd love to be a part of that conversation because that's something that I don't have knowledge of every single place and what makes sense for every place. So I think that would be something that I would say everyone should go do after this call is look at that map, see where the sites are and see what areas of your town or your neighborhood that are not being served. And ask questions. I would say too, I don't want to speak for you, Leah, but I think a lot of the people that run these programs, they have a lot of knowledge of their community, but it is also can be limited. So I think a lot of people that run summer programs really rely on feedback from the community, saying, this site doesn't work because we have to cross an interstate. Could you make it across, like small changes that you could make. People a lot of times will listen to you. So your voice matters there.
Well, that's a great way to kind of wrap us up today with those calls of actions. I know that we could certainly share that link with those that are on the call and also the data that you all kind of presented. I just want to say thank you to each of you all. This was a meaningful discussion around a critical topic during this time that we know that many families and kids are facing. So thank you to each of you, and I am going to turn it over to Jessie.
Thanks, Mahek, and I'll echo your thanks to all 3 of our panelists. I think it's really cool to have folks in 3 very different kinds of roles who are coming together to address a really complicated problem. So really appreciate all of you coming to talk with us today. And as I was listening to Leah talk about the families that she met, while their school bus was out delivering food, I remember this story that I read in the New York Times from like a month and a half ago. And it was talking actually about how beneficial of a program pandemic EBT is for families. And this mom was talking about she and her husband suddenly having to feed 2 teenage sons, which I imagine those of you who've had teenagers in your home can relate to this, that, all of a sudden that they're home all the time. And so the article said she and her husband would feed their sons first, pretending to be distracted while the boys grabbed seconds. She and her husband would say, "Oh, there's plenty left," and then eat a bologna sandwich later. But the older one caught on and said, "No, Mom, I'm full," when the mom knew that he wasn't. And, as a mom, that really pulled at my heart. And I think, we know that kind of thing is happening in households across Kentucky. And for a lot of families, that's happening maybe for the very first time. So if I can say that I found this conversation really reassuring when listening to you all, It's that ingenuity, it's that willingness for Kentuckians to like come together and protect their own. There's common sense policy solutions, and then that, you know, that need for more collaboration and those investments like PET. So as Commissioner Quarles mentioned, there are many pieces to public policy, and every one of you on the forum today is one of those pieces for public policy. Y'all are influencers, you're connectors, you're problem solvers, and you're so devoted and such great, powerful advocates for kids. So thanks for spending your morning with us, and thanks in advance for what's going to be asked of all of us in shaping policy and coming up with even more ingenious ideas over the next few months. So next week we'll be discussing the evolving challenges and opportunities for kids with special needs and their families. So topics will include like experiences during the quarantine, increased need for services like respite or educational needs, how those experiences are different based on race, and then opportunities, bright spots, policies and budget investments that are needed. So we look forward to seeing all of you then. And before we go, I just want to share with Commissioner Quarles a quick story, because you mentioned the state fair, and that's really timely because my son and I were talking about the state fair this morning, and last year we were at the state fair for the first time, and he's 3, and last year he was 3, and we're walking around and they have like the milking demonstrations for the cows, and my son's allergic to milk, and he just looked at me with a very serious face and he said, "Mommy, where are the soy cows?" So if you could just maybe, I know this fair is going to be different. This would be short notice on planning, but maybe if next year we could have like a soy cow display, that would be, that would be
Put it next
great.
to the chocolate milk cow and the strawberry milk cow.
Exactly, exactly. That would be wonderful. So that's just let me just plant that seed there, and because he was not as impressed when I took him to show him the soybean plants. So so please consider that. All right, everyone, thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning. We'll send out a follow-up email with all the resources we shared today, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you all. Bye.
Thank you.